G'day fellas, Griggsy here, taking you through the answers for Unit 4, Area Study 1 SAC, that being on consciousness. So question 1, please indicate which sleep theory would make the following claims. Sleep increases alertness, that would be the restorative theory in terms of battery recharging. Sleep conserves energy, again, restorative. Um, the sleep depends on the need for food was evolutionary. And that's because obviously it's easy to find food during the day with your vision being more accessible or your visual system. Sleep increases immunity to disease. I'd pay that as either evolutionary or restorative. Sleep activates growth hormones, restorative. So growth hormones to basically restore the body or to grow the body. Sleep depends on animals' vulnerability to predators. Pretty clearly, they're evolutionary, safer at night to sleep. We spoke about that in class quite extensively. And sleep repairs and replenishes the body and prepares it for the next day is restorative. So that was worth 7 marks there, one for each one. You obviously need to know what the two different sleep theories and apply them to the correct statements. Okay, question 2A. Jimmy has been drinking alcohol and reported that he entered an altered state of consciousness. Name and describe two psychological characteristics which Jimmy is likely to experience while in this altered state. Your answers must identify how these characteristics differ from normal waking consciousness. So you got a mark for listing any of these. So that was from dot point 3 in consciousness. So our very first our third dot point, I should say. And then you needed to explain how it would differ from normal waking consciousness. So, for example, if you're talking about time orientation, you would say could be either increased or decreased. If you got self-control, it would be decreased self-control, and a little explanation maybe for that would have helped. But you just needed to indicate the direction or how it would differ from NWC. Using the example of Jimmy, what is the best physiological measurement of consciousness that could be used to identify that he has indeed entered an altered state of consciousness? And please explain your response to justify your answer. So it's quite clearly an EEG. The reason it's an EEG is because the other two physiological measurements that we looked are used to differentiate between sleep states. And therefore wouldn't be applicable to this particular example. The EEG would detect, amplify, and record electrical activity in the brain, which would allow us to see Jimmy's brain waves and make an assessment of whether he had indeed entered an altered state of consciousness due to a different brain waves. So, question 3, sleep researcher William Demmett ran a study for healthy adults. For 5 nights, he woke participants every time their EEG showed beta-like waves. EMG showed muscle paralysis, and EOG showed higher level of activity. So that's quite clearly indicating there that that's REM sleep. Mainly due, if you couldn't have worked it out from anything else, you would have known from the EOG high level of activity. The two characteristics of this sleep are obviously rapid eye movement, muscle paralysis, high level of brain activity compared to non-REM sleep, all of which are basically stated there in the scenario. So you just needed to be able to identify them from the scenario there to get your 2 marks. So those were really three marks there pretty cheaply. Question 4A, Rajan, a journalist, frequently travels overseas to work but finds it difficult to sleep on a plane. And then he slept in short bursts of 30 minutes for a total of 4 hours. So there's an issue with his, going to be an issue with his quantity and his quality of sleep. And that indicates to me straight away that he's had partial sleep deprivation. So you'd be talking about your affective, behavioural, and cognitive effects of mood there. So you need to list 2 for each particular example, and then also, where appropriate, indicate I guess how they would be affected. So, for example, you couldn't just write for behavioural performance. You need to actually indicate that it was slowed performance. You couldn't just write motivation for effective. You'd have to write a lack of motivation or reduced motivation. So, and that you've got 2 marks for each different section there. So that's 6 pretty much just memorization marks there. Um, and then with relation to his interview question 4B here, um, he's pretty clearly indicating that he'd be in beta waves because he's sort of pretty focused. You'd expect him to be, given that he's awake, he'll be beta or alpha waves. So couldn't really be anything other than that. And the fact he's alert indicates that it's got to be beta waves. And then describing, you also need to describe the frequency and amplitude to get your mark there, because beta is really too easy just to get a mark. Rajan then had to sit with another 10 people and watch a video. This sounds a lot like a simple task to me, which is why he had problems staying awake. So it most likely indicates due to, I guess, the fact he's kicking out. That was something that was discussed very briefly in a video we watched, but the fact that he's just dropping off into sleep would indicate that he's going into non-REM stage 1, because we know that that's generally the first stage that people go into when they're entering a sleep cycle. So, and the fact that he could be easily woken out of this stage indicates that it's that stage of sleep, because he was woken quite regularly, and then would go back to sleep. So 4D, which of the following would be more likely to be affected by his sleep deprivation, ability to participate in the interview, or his ability to watch the video? So quite clearly from the examples, you can see that his ability to watch the video would be more impacted, and you need to explain why though. And that's really the key there. The fact it's a simple task, and we know that simple tasks are more affected in sleep deprived states than complex tasks. So question 5, using examples, distinguish between circadian and ultradian sleep patterns. Pretty simple there, just needed to give an example of each. That's where most people would struggle there, but difference between circadian rhythm, and that's meant to be obviously where as there 24 hours for circadian rhythms, less than 24 hours for ultradian rhythms, and then the 2 examples we discussed in class to demonstrate that difference. Explain the difference, explain the adolescent sleep-wake cycle and why it is often associated with sleep deprivation. So the first stage is the first mark here is just describing the fact that sleep-wake cycle is pushed 1 to 2 hours later. And then the second mark is for explaining that due to environmental factors, like mainly being having to be up to school, this can lead to sleep deprivation because you don't get to finish your normal sleep cycle, your normal sleep amount, or get your normal sleep amount throughout that night. So we've got Jonah, elite athlete. You just need to give 2 different strategies for him to achieve a better night's sleep. And this was discussed, or this would be just a matter of implementing your learning from throughout the course, to sort of provide any sort of strategies that were backed by anything that we discussed would be relevant here. So reducing light exposure before bed, turning off electrical devices before sleep, not drinking caffeine. Those sort of things those are the 3 answers that I've given, but there's plenty that you could have added to that. WAC, interesting name, is a 10-year-old boy diagnosed with a sleep disorder. Giving you 2 hints there to indicate that he's suffering from sleepwalking. 1, the fact it's non-REM sleep, and 2, somnambulism was the other name for it. So it's a type of parasomnia. 1 mark for sleepwalking and 1 mark for saying that it's a parasomnia. And then this is actually from last year's SAC. A lot of boys struggled with this, so I thought I'd put it back on. Sally is a student who struggles to fall asleep, struggles to get to sleep. She often stay awake for 2 hours at night before falling asleep. What type of sleep disturbance is Sally suffering from? It's sleep onset insomnia. So the reason this isn't a circadian phase disorder is it just talks about her struggling to fall asleep at night rather than a shift in her sleep-wake cycle or waking up later in the morning. So it can't be a circadian phase disorder. And you also couldn't put just generally a dysomnia because that's not specific enough. So you needed to indicate it was sleep onset insomnia there. Identify and explain an effective treatment. So CBT or cognitive behavioural therapy is really the only one that you could use there. It's not bright light therapy because otherwise that's indicating it's a circadian phase disorder, which is not the concern. It's falling asleep at night. 1 mark for each correct statement below. So CBT is the most effective method for treating insomnia, and then giving some sort of explanation as to how that can work. So I've got some examples here of how it can work, pretty much directly off our notes. So explaining that or choosing CBT was 1 mark, and then giving me 2 other relevant comments about CBT with relation to insomnia. Got you the other marks. And then 10A, pretty simple question there. Straight off our notes, 4 marks. Anywhere in that range or the ranges that I've given you would be marked as correct. Pretty much direct memorization of the quantity of sleep that people get at certain ages. So differences in sleep across a lifespan. And then this one is with the same dot point but reference to REM sleep. So the fact he would have the most is because he's a baby and he has 50% REM sleep. But you needed to also indicate in terms of, so it was the greatest proportion of REM sleep is the baby brother at 50%, but how many hours would they have in one night? How many hours of REM sleep would they have in one night? He would have 8 hours, okay? Because at 50%, he would have 8 hours of his 16 hours would be in REM sleep. And then you had the media response, and it was pretty much 1 mark for listing each of or giving an incident that demonstrated an ASC, and then 1 mark for an explanation as to why it was an altered state of consciousness. So these were the different types that you could have used, or anything else that I might have missed here, and then explaining them why they're an ASC got you the other mark. So I hope that all makes sense, fellas. Let me know if you've got any questions. As always, you're more than welcome to challenge your mark, and I look forward to going through it with you in class.